snows in your nose, you catch cold in your brain. Allen Ginsberg. Thank you for joining us for our 17th episode of Sex, Drugs, and Spirituality as we explore cocaine from its social history to harm reduction. But before we dive into our main topic, allow us to introduce ourselves.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Jackie Lyons of Akashic Energy Healing.
And I'm Elizabeth Maria of Elizabeth Maria Unlimited. And together, we're the hosts of Sex, Drugs, and Spirituality, where we navigate the power of personal growth and self-discovery through exploration and acceptance of our shadow selves. Okay, guys, welcome today. So we are talking about cocaine.
I like the quote.
Yes, isn't that? Yes, I love it too, because it really just encompasses, the experience of cocaine, that that numbing effect. You catch cold in your brain. So guys, we are here today to talk about the history of cocaine. It is a complex and multifaceted topic. And, the use actually dates back thousands of years. So before we go into our discussion, here's an overview of the history of cocaine. So there's been ancient use. Cocaine originated from the cocoa plant, which has been cultivated for its stimulating effects by indigenous peoples in South America for thousands of years. In the Andean region, cocoa leaves were chewed or brewed for tea for their energizing properties. So during the colonial era, during the Spanish colonial period in South America, cocoa use became intertwined with the forced labor of indigenous populations, as it helped workers endure long hours of physical labor. And I have more to say about that, but we'll move on first. Anyways, until up towards the 19th century, cocaine gained attention in Europe and in the United States. And it was a German chemist by the name of Albert Niemann. This was in 1859. He was the first to isolate the active compound of cocoa leaves, and he named it cocaine. So its stimulating effects made it very popular as an ingredient for various tonics, elixirs, and different medications back then. And so before being a recreational drug, cocaine was used medically. It was widely used in the medical field during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. It was touted as a treatment for a range of ailments, including toothaches, headaches, depression, and even addiction to other substances. And as we've discussed before, Sigmund Freud famously advocated for this therapeutic use. So moving forward into recreational use, as its popularity grew, cocaine began to be used recreationally, particularly among wealthy elites. It was often associated with glamorous lifestyles and depicted as a status symbol in our popular culture. So, concerns about the addictive and harmful effects of cocaine led to the eventual regulation and criminalization in many countries. In the United States, they passed the Harrison Narcotics Act in 1914, which restricted the sale and the distribution of cocaine and other narcotics. So in the 20th century to the present, even though cocaine has been banned in many countries, it still remains a popular recreational drug and is still used in some medical situations as well. And throughout the 20th century, it was associated with various subcultures, including the jazz and the Harlem Renaissance jazz scene of the 1920s and 30s. And also, it was really big in the disco era of the 1970s. So there have been several cocaine epidemics, and which of course have contributed to social and public health challenges. So in the 1980s, cocaine saw a huge surge in the United States, and this was particularly due to the emergence of crack cocaine. And this form of cocaine really disproportionately affected low income, kind of inner city communities. And, I can say a lot about that too. And I feel like we'll definitely have to have an entire episode on crack cocaine as well. So as far as the global trade and trafficking, cocaine production and trafficking have and are major issues in many countries, particularly in regions where the cocoa plant is cultivated, such as Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia. So the illicit cocaine trade has, of course, fueled violence, corruption, and instability in these regions. And so today, cocaine is still widely used, despite, and I'm going to put little air quotes when I say efforts, because I have a lot to say about that too. I think there's definitely a reason why it is still imported to this country at such a, that in vast quantities, despite efforts to curb its production and distribution. So it remains a significant public health concern, right? It is highly addictive, and there's a lot of health risks involved with excessing on this on this substance. So those include cardiovascular problems, a slew of different mental health issues, and of course overdose. So there's been a lot of efforts over the years, especially during the 1970s and moving forward, to address cocaine abuse. And that includes different types of prevention, different treatments, and, as we'll move into after our discussion, harm reduction strategies. So that was a lot.
That's an
just kind of
interesting overview of the history.
Yes.
Interesting. And
Yeah.
I do like what you said about the efforts they have taken to, minimize the trafficking of it, which with the side eye there, right?
Yeah.
The efforts of, putting low-level drug dealers and users in jail for obscene amounts of time, while major companies and governments are facilitating the import of these products to just to line their pockets. So it's really
absolutely.
And I hear what you're saying about the crack addiction and having a full show about that, because I would be interested in learning about how it came to be, and it really was pushed towards the most vulnerable of our population.
Yes.
And so you see where at that one point only the elite can do cocaine, and then they're throwing out this lower level, very highly more addictive part of it, in my opinion, to the seemingly most vulnerable of our people, which is really sad.
Yeah, I believe that it was all designed that way, and it's really interesting that a couple things stood out to me in the history. One, indigenous populations have used various kind of mind altering or stimulant types of plants for a millennia without huge insane epidemics and what we see in our Western culture. And one is that they did not what was it, they didn't isolate the addictive compounds, right? I mean, they were chewing on the cocoa leaf or making a tea from it, and so I really feel that it's when our Western mind, decides to, it's almost like an excessive mental state that we want to pull out all of the most harmful extracts from it, throw away really the medicinal quality of it, and then we're gonna bleach that shit white, you know what I mean?
Throw it in
And
the
then we're
gas
gonna
tank of a boat and ship it on over.
exactly. And the same thing honestly happened with sugar, which I feel is honestly the gateway drug, not marijuana, but sugar, white sugar and flour, with the white flour,
Yeah.
and rice is another, like it's like our Western mind wants to just strip out all the actual nutrients from all of these beautiful, God-given plants, and then we end up accessing on this, and I mean to the detriment of our entire society.
Yeah.
So that really stood out to me, because I mean, I know the Colombians are still chewing on the cocoa leaf,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, they're doing, you can go walk down the road. I remember our girlfriend of ours lived in Colombia, and she said that they're still facilitating cocoa tea ceremonies regularly.
yeah,
Um, and I think it was you who said it in a previous episode that the further away from the original state, the less healing qualities that are left within the product. And it's so true when it comes to the process of making cocaine or even crack cocaine.
right, absolutely, absolutely. And again, I feel like this is all by design. It also
Well, it's a little too hard not to see that it is by design when all of a sudden, like you said, in the 80s, there was this massive war on drugs, quote, quote, and then all of a sudden, you have the most vulnerable of people being peddled drugs at what, $10
yeah,
a bag? This really expensive
yeah,
drug at $10 a hit in the communities that are already so in poverty and struggling.
yes,
And of course that was by design. Like, I mean, it's too
yeah.
hard not to see that they were trying to,
So,
create,
well, really like suppressed and
yeah,
oppressed,
oppressed, exactly.
specific populations. Absolutely. And it also, and this, we're gonna have to get into we're gonna have to get in more to the idea of eugenics, because that was really what the philosophy of Nazism and everything was based on. But it, the fact that it was a German scientist, and no offense towards my German friends out there.
I'm German.
Wunderbar. Wunderbar. I love you guys. But
Okay,
I
I
mean, this
forgive
was,
you. I'm Canadian, but I
yes,
do have the German heritage, and come on. Those Germans and they're
right.
smart. They're just too smart with their rockets and their God.
Right, right. I mean, I love the Germans. However, this, the German chemist that isolated the first compounds in 1859, this was at the very beginning stages of the idea of eugenics in Germany. And so it really, I feel like it kind of coincides with this idea of creating like the best human, if you will. And so it makes sense that, because cocaine, it was used not only in South America for forced labor, for those enslaved, and for what is it? Oh, I'm totally spacing the term, but indentured servitude as well,
Okay.
in South America, but also in America on up through the late 1800s. It was actually used for dock workers, and I mean, just anyone that had laborious tasks to do, like the boss man would give them cocaine to
Well, and I
freaking
think we all
to
know
work.
that it was also in Coca-Cola at one point in the 30s.
Yes.
So, I mean, different mindsets back then. I mean, when the rich were benefiting from it, seemed to be a little bit more accessible, but all of a sudden, you know, they decide, I don't know, maybe too many poor people were getting the good stuff, so they created something lesser, more addictive, more damaging.
Absolutely. Yeah. Cause, you know, because it's interesting too how cocaine, you know, the white powdery substance cocaine is still like this, you know, the idea around it is still this idea of glamour and edgy glamour,
party drug, you know. Yeah.
Whereas
expensive, and it is, it's not cheap, right? It's not
right. It's cheap. Expensive for sure.
I never heard about a $10 line bag out there.
Right. I mean, I have.
Maybe they do.
Actually, I mean, in the States, like when I was doing it out in San Francisco, and I ended up dating a lot of heroin addicts back then, and I'm not really sure because I didn't even like it. But anyways, that was a bit of a digression. But I remember that you could go down to the Mission, and this was like in the early 1990s, and you could get like a $10 bag of cocaine of powder and a $10 bag of heroin. And
I heard about the heroin, but not in my city. I mean, I don't know if there is somewhere, but not that I knew of.
Yeah, but you know, that's it, regardless. Yeah, it's really expensive, and it's been associated with, you know, this glamorous lifestyle, the elites, whatever. And then, like you said, like once it became more popular, that was when, you know, this new like in the 70s, you know, and it became, because, you know, through the disco era, it got really popular. And I'm thinking of you know, just like all those famous disco clubs. I'm trying to remember the name of that
like
one.
the Studio 69.
Yeah. And,
and it's the Hollywood glamorous lifestyle, right? You're partying all night, you're drinking, you're in the fanciest clothes with the fanciest people, and they portray this lifestyle that, and now everybody wants to emulate because you know, everybody's looking up to these people. We have idolized these frauds our whole life. Now we're like, they've done nothing. They probably don't even, they're not even that good in the fucking movie to begin with. Like, what the fuck? We are idolizing these people for doing
now I'm like, are they
nothing.
Even real? Are they not just all clones? I don't know.
I don't know. Like, I mean, and then now that I look back, because there was a time in my life where that meant everything to me. That I wanted that lifestyle so bad, and oh my God, thank God the devil didn't find me when he could have, because I would have sold my soul to the devil if you caught me in my 20s. You know what I mean?
So glad that I caught you in your late 30s.
Yeah, I was like, honestly, and I look back now to see, you know, how quickly and where my mindset was back then, and how willing I would have, honestly, like I said, sold anything to be somebody that people emulated or that looked at, and I would have been right there in the party scene, and I would have loved it to death until, you know, I ended up in hell for the choices I made. But it is, I wanted it so bad.
It was such an allure during that time. And so it totally makes sense that, you know, because it became such like popular culture during that time, that, like you said, that, you know, everyday, quote unquote, everyday people are going to want to start emulating that. And that is in the 1980s is when they introduce, you know, the crack cocaine. And it just has literally decimated neighborhoods. And so again, friends out there listening, we will definitely do an entire episode on crack, you know, so we don't want to spend too much time on kind of the, you know, political kind of, you know, ideas that I know I have around, you know, why certain neighborhoods were targeted, you know. However, so it, you know, it just had, and it still does, and it's really interesting, like it's almost like the story around certain drugs, you know. It's real interesting that cocaine still has this elite kind of feel, whereas like the new drug that has been, you know, really I believe I look at it as chemical warfare. That is how I see like this influx of the new drugs, especially like fentanyl and stuff like that. You know, how it's just being pumped in, you know, I mean, and strategically put in, you know, certain areas, certain neighborhoods. So it's pretty, you know,
It is, and we'll dedicate a full episode, because I would like to get some information as to, you brought up information about how cocaine was transformed, but who came up with the whole from cocaine to crack? Maybe there's a history we haven't explored there to get a little bit more understanding of how that came to be to begin with in that sense. So that's a great, I guess, segue into the next part of our topic here. And I think this is something that me and Elizabeth both very strongly agree with, which is a harm reduction mentality around drug use. And we're kind of on the same page with that. And this is something that not everybody believes that this is the way that you should go, but we're adamant on our beliefs around this method of healing and working with reducing the harm that we're causing to ourselves. So with cocaine and harm reduction, it's really meeting the user where they're at without shame, judgment, or condemnation of the choices that they made that led them to where they are. And we're hugely a part of that no judgment zone. We will meet you. And I think me and Elizabeth strive in being able to meet people where they are at. And
absolutely,
it's part of our core basis to the services we provide to our clients. And really just a little background on harm reduction. It was formed out of a grassroots activist organization such as the Black Panthers and the women's movement in the 1970s. And it really started as a way to respond to the crisis of the AIDS epidemic in the 1980s. And, you know, just to give you guys some practical understanding of harm reduction strategies, they are really aimed to reduce the negative consequences that are associated with drug use. And this movement for social justice is built on respect for the rights of people who do use drugs. And I love that. Honestly, because how many of us who are in a cycle of addiction have felt like we have, you know, nobody who is thinking about where we're at? You know, they give us this expectation that we have to live up to. And, you know, some of us have to build our way out of the gutter in order to even get up to that. So harm reduction strategies offer an approach to mitigate the harm associated with the use of drugs. And today we're talking about cocaine specifically, but these strategies will include education, outreach, and access to other treatments, and, you know, really trying to prevent overdoses in this situation. And so when we're using harm reduction mentalities, we are addressing the underlying factors that contribute to the drug use. So these are factors such as poverty and trauma and social injustice. Poverty, what a big one. Hey, I know that I just can't get past how their facility, I mean, how they flood the most vulnerable people with the worst chemicals. Anyways, another day, another show. When we adopt a compassionate approach to harm reduction, it really aims to destigmatize drug use and support individuals in navigating and understanding more healthy ways to, you know, move towards wholeness, or what their idea of recovery is, because we're all in a different place of what happy recovery looks like for us. My version of that might not be yours. Your version might not be mine, but we, you know, what is happiness for each individual? And I took harm reduction mentality myself. When I was coming off cocaine specifically, I started smoking weed in excess, about 10 to 12 joints a day, to facilitate that huge step of coming off of the cocaine. And then, you know, after I felt really comfortable with it, then I started to decrease the weed intake, and I went so on and so forth until I finally got to a place where I felt like I was not in an active addiction state. And then I could kind of navigate my emotions fully myself. And then I can choose if I want to incorporate any of these back into my life. It's never going to be for me in a place of a daily addiction or a daily need to fulfill, but I don't want to live a life where I don't get to experience everything that life has to offer. So that is success for me. So, and I feel like I have got there by using these harm reduction strategies. that might not be the case for the people who are listening. Some of you may not be able to do harm reduction and might have to do, you know, full abstinence from substances, and that is okay as well. But I think the open mindedness about different ways that people heal is really what we're trying to get on here, and that there is no judgment if you're choosing to come off of heroin or cocaine or fentanyl or any of these things, and you're choosing to lessen that with, say, mushrooms or marijuana or any other substances that might, you know, help you to facilitate getting off of these bigger ones that are, you know, could be causing illness or possibly bringing you close to death.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much, Jackie, for that overview of harm reduction. And really, you know, friends out there, Jackie and I we definitely both come from a non-judgmental stance, you know, so wherever, you know, the person is in their journey, and you know, and we're talking about cocaine today, but really this is about, you know, finding personal balance within yourself, and that is why it is an individual journey, you know. And I really didn't start, because you know, I started the recovery journey, I mean, at a really young age, like I've said, and I was pretty much like, you know, under the, I mean, I was made to believe that the only way to find that balance was in full abstinence. You know, I went to my first NA meeting when I was probably like 13 or 14, way before I was finished experimenting. And so, you know, from that time, I mean, you know, I was under the assumption that this was the only way. And you know, just based on our last podcast on abstinence, it's interesting that, you know, we're moving into cocaine, because you know, when we're talking about when you are purely abstinent from sex for the wrong, and I don't want to say there is a right or wrong, but for more unhealthy reasons, you know, like I ended up repressing a lot of that energy instead of you know, instead of transmuting it, instead of you know, kind of whatever, like integrating it into my body, right, in a healthy way. And so when I did start to, you know, have intimate relationships again, it was like all the ugly that I hadn't been able to process just came up, like, I mean, 10 million times worse, right? And so, you know, and the rooms people talk about, oh, your addiction's out there doing push-ups, just getting ready to you know, to come back in your life. And that is absolutely true, because for a lot of people that do choose total abstinence, it's not, it's a fear-based
It's
abstinence.
avoidance.
Yeah, it's avoidance from it. And so I love how harm reduction is really about, hey, you know, this isn't about demonizing the individual for their choices. There is a reason why anyone, you know, regardless if they're the Hollywood elite deciding to go on bingers, or you know, you're more everyday people, there's a reason why people move towards using substances, you know, and it's like a haphazard band-aid, if you will, you know what I mean?
It
And so,
is. Oh.
yeah.
And
Mhm.
Elizabeth, you know, you speaking that, like, and I think I mentioned this before, I only gained the awareness of how I was, for me, I'm not an addict. I wasn't born an addict. And I
Yes.
always felt like I had addictive tendencies. But what I realized through the journey and the back and forth journey of my addiction is that I was facilitating a need that wasn't being met. I was traumatized and I was scared. That was
Yes.
the need. And I filled it with what I didn't know that that was the need. I was too young. It was something that was always there. I thought it was just a part of me. I didn't understand that. So I would fill it with whatever it was. It was cigarettes, it was weed, it was cocaine, it was this, that, the other. That it wasn't an addiction. It was a core need, a security within me that wasn't being fed. And then I tried to find anything I could to
Yes.
fill it. It wasn't about the drugs.
It
was
wasn't.
about this core need that was not being met. And that's for me in my story. But without the back and forth, because I was told too, and that's what kept me out of recovery for so long, is that you had to abstain forever. And I don't believe that that's a life I want to live. That life to me seems like a life not worth living, to avoid people, places, and situations because I am not feeling adequately whole.
Right.
And it was only because of the back and forth that I was ever able to gain this awareness. So abstinence would be a Band-Aid for me. It would not have allowed me, it would just be a lifetime of avoidance. And like you said, at some point, it's going to come back because that need still wasn't being met. And that was the underlying, I guess, point that brought me into these addictive tendencies later on. And without that awareness and the back and forth, like it would be avoiding. And I honestly, I can't even tell you how much it makes me aggravated right now just thinking about avoiding.
Right. And, you know, and friends, I mean, we know that everyone is on their own spiritual recovery journey path. Whatever that looks like for you is, you know, the right path at the right moment for you. So if you are someone, you know, that is choosing to go totally abstinent, I mean, we're not, you know, against that either.
No.
It's just what
if you can, great.
For you, you know, it's all about coming into balance, you know. And because like my daughter had, you know, she's such a freaking wise soul. I mean, she was like 16 when she said this to me. She was like, Mommy, you know, happy people don't want to numb out. They don't want to get, you know, wasted drunk or whatever, you know, because I mean, the world is a beautiful place and there's so much joy in it, you know, without having to like numb yourself. And so, Jackie, I 100% agree with you that it wasn't that we were like born addicts, you know, that it was, you know, fear driven from being traumatized, you know. And so, and it was like, you know, like I said, just kind of a haphazard band-aid. And so I love, you know, the approach of the harm reduction movement. We will have an entire episode on this. I have several friends that are pretty active in this, you know, movement that, you know, when we get to interviewing, I really want to bring one of them on because she is super awesome.
Can't wait.
Else about the harm reduction as it relates to cocaine?
Yeah. I honestly am really passionate about this topic, probably because it has such a impactful, meaningful expression within my own personal journey. So I think we just always scrape the top barrel, and we are just going to continue to dive deeper into these topics because they are not just affecting us, they are affecting so many people. I don't know if I know a person in my life that isn't avoiding an addiction right now. So we've only begun to scratch the surface of this topic. And I just really want to thank everybody so much for joining us today. Today, we had discussed cocaine from its history to harm reduction. So thank you guys again. Your comments and your perspectives are truly important to us. So please continue to reach out. If you have a question for us to explore on our show or any question concerning our podcast, please contact us at sexdrugsandspiritualitypodcast@gmail.com.
And if you'd like to contact us about our individual client offerings, please click the link in our description and be sure to mention that you heard about us on Spotify. And we look forward to connecting with all of you, our spiritual community, at 11 p.m. EST every Saturday on Spotify to explore and integrate the shadow side of our reality.
Bye, friends.
Hey, bye, guys. Love and light.
Sex, Drugs, and Spirituality Podcast. Elizabeth Maria, Unlimited LLC. And Jackie Lyons of Akashic Energy Healing is not responsible nor liable for any advice, course of treatment, diagnosis, or any other information, services, or products that you obtain through this website.